Hey, this is Tandy with Common Ground Alaska, and I am really, really excited to have Leah from Foundroot today on our show. And Leah and her husband Nick started Foundroot a while back. We're going to find out when in a moment, but they started it a while back. And the vision behind Foundroot and the passion behind this little amazing ag business is pretty incredible. And I think that you're really going to enjoy the story that she has to tell. She also has some pretty great wisdom on things like seed saving and just generally gardening all across the state. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for you to get to talk with Leah. And Leah, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we started Foundroot 10 years ago, actually. Almost 11 now. So we've been around for a long time, and we started as a seed business, and that's mostly what we've been for that time. We've been an online seed retailer specializing in seeds proven for northern gardening. And we have only sold open pollinated seeds for the entirety of our existence. And a huge part of our passion is teaching people how to save seeds and understanding what's happening in the seed industry and feel empowered to grow their own food no matter what the scale is. And so we're really driven by the belief that food brings people together and helps us feel safer in a changing climate.
Wow, I love that. That was amazing right there. Now I'm excited. Okay. All right. So I'm just gonna jump right in. First I want to hear a little bit more about Foundry. Let's dig a little deeper. So you are a seed business, and that's the piece that I was most excited about when I pulled up your website, I was like, oh, more local seeds. But then the more I dug in, your website is rich with just information and you have some really neat stuff. So yeah, I want to hear about Foundroot, when you started, and let's just hear your story.
Sure. Yeah, I had been working on farms and I saw a real need for seeds for the North. My husband is born and raised Alaskan, and I joined him 14 years ago, pretty early in our relationship. And really saw a need for better seeds for the North. And so I kind of started on a whim. We went to farmers markets and just sort of asked folks if they cared about seeds. And there was a resounding yes. We were in Palmer at that time. And so within 2 years, we decided to move to Haines, Alaska, which is a pretty remote community, because we believed it was the best climate for breeding seeds for northern gardens. And we established about a 1 acre market garden on Old Homestead in Haines over the course of about 5 years. And we were feeding over 50 different families in our community. We're sending food over to Juneau, to restaurants and wholesalers over there. We had about 8 different wholesale accounts. And unfortunately, in 2021, we lost that land. And so right now, we are trying to find new land to move our farm to. And we are still growing on a small, about quarter-acre subsistence garden. And that's where we're trialing seeds. And we hope to be doing a lot more in the future with that element of it. But as it stands, we're really excited just to get great seeds out to Alaskans and other northern growers or people in challenging climates that are similar to our conditions.
Wow, I love that. So, gosh, that just brings so many questions to mind that it's kind of hard. Like, I just want to ask them all, just all in a big, but that's not helpful. So let's start with this. So you say that you grow seed. You were in Palmer, so you were in the valley, and then you
Mhm.
moved to Haines. And
Mhm.
but these seeds that you're trialing, those are good for all of Alaska, correct? I mean, I think that's a major
Yeah.
distinction at first.
Yeah, we've actually gotten a huge push from Fairbanks, which has never been a big part of our market. I know there is some home like smaller scale seed growers that were just selling locally there. And so we really wanted to give space to that. And so we didn't advertise a ton in Fairbanks. And it is distinctly different from Haines um and so yeah, anyway, that's just an example of a market that we feel like our seeds would do great in, but obviously there's different growing conditions. And so you have to always reference the local knowledge and that base to really understand what will do well. We keep a pretty strict baseline. And so we are not, our hope is to push the envelope, but we are not selling anything that we don't feel would grow well statewide. There are obviously things on the periphery, like eggplants are going to be really difficult no matter where you are in Alaska. They're going to be particularly difficult in cooler, actually, honestly, more coastal places a lot of the time. And so each plant kind of has its own needs, but we try and average the difference, for lack of a better term. And so we really feel confident that everything we sell is at least worth trying in your area, and most of it will thrive. We don't have okra, we don't have corn, we have very few peppers because these are the ones that we feel really confident would work in most of our state.
Okay, I love that. So the another thing that you mentioned that this is a little bit off. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'm excited about this, so I want to make sure the point doesn't get lost. So did you say that right now what you're doing is about the property that you have is about a quarter acre?
Yeah, we're only growing on a quarter acre, and it's mostly our family's subsistence. We do have a commercial hoop house, so we have 2 tomato varieties that are our seed in the catalog this year. They're just really special ones that we didn't want to see lost. And so as soon as we got that hoop house set up, we dedicated most of that space. And we're scrappy. We haven't had a lot of resources, and we haven't had a lot of infrastructure since we started. And so we do things pretty similar to how a lot of our customers do it. We're not this big shiny commercial farm. We're just a family business, and so we save the scraps and we make sauce out of them, and those seeds go to our customers all over the country, but we still utilize that food for our family. And we have some other ones that hopefully we'll be able to add to the catalog this year, but a huge part of us not having our main farm field has been connecting with other growers around the country, and that's really, really important to us, is to be giving our money directly to farmers as much as possible. And so we've always bought from a lot of co-ops and different groups that sort of bring those growers together. But whenever we can actually buy directly from the grower and have a personal relationship with them, that's our priority. And so when you look at our catalog, you'll see which ones were grown by us. There are I think the only one we have that's seed grown by another Alaskan right now is from Grow North Farm, the refugee farming project in Anchorage. They have some really, really cool seed in our catalog right now. And besides that, it's a lot of growers in the Pacific Northwest, some in the Northeast, and we link to them, we reference them, we want them to get that credit because they're going to sell things that we might not feel comfortable putting in our catalog because it's not great for all of Alaska, but maybe it's good for some Alaskans, or we have a lot of customers in Washington and Oregon, and so maybe it would work for them. It just depends. And so, yeah, we are really excited to keep those connections growing, and that's been a really wonderful part of this pause from the main farm.
I love that. That's so great. That's amazing. So, yeah, so the fact that you're supporting farms directly to the farms, I think that's just super important, kind of like you said, because it's building that relationship and keeping that community strong. Because that's, I mean, anyone who's listened to us for 10 minutes knows that that's a huge part of, I say that we want to be self-sustainable, backed by a community. So, we are part of this amazing community, and we are aware that, man was not made to be an island, and community is super important. And so, my example that I usually give is that we're not the best beekeepers, so we have people who keep bees on our place because it's an amazing place to keep bees. But we just don't have the time, and the bees deserve better. And, we get, there's more honey production when someone else is managing them. And I think that's the case with so many of the things, we all have like our superpower, the things that we love doing, but other people, we need to be community. That's kind of the bottom line. So, so I still want to circle back to this quarter acre thing, because what I hear, one common common thread that I hear is when people say, well, I don't have enough room to do anything. I don't have, I can't grow much for my family because, all I have is my yard, or all I have is this, or all I have is that. And you say you're growing a subsistence garden for your family on a 1/4 acre. Would you mind kind of digging into that just a little bit? Because I would love to hear what that looks like. And let's inspire people who don't have, acres to plant.
Gosh, what does that look like? It actually looks like a lot of perennials because we didn't have time to keep up with it when we had the farm. And so it's just been 2 seasons of really getting back to it. And to be perfectly honest, it was really devastating when we lost the farm. And so not much was grown in 2021. We really didn't have a lot of our own food that not this winter, but the winter before. And so that was a big goal for us in 2022, is to get back to our subsistence and to feel like, even if we weren't able to grow food for our community, even if we weren't able to grow as many seed crops as we'd like, we at least were trialing things and really showing kind of the edges and borders of what northern growing looks like. And that's just always been part of our philosophy, is understanding how much really is possible up here and how bountiful your garden can be. I would say that the vast majority of our gardeners are growing in a couple 4x4 raised beds, honestly. I mean, no, that's not the vast majority, but many, there's so many people who are just growing on a small home scale. We get tons of questions about container gardening all the time, just supporting people to grow no matter what scale it is. It all contributes to our food system. And so even if you have a windowsill herb garden in Anchorage, that has value. That is one less plant that needs to travel so very far away to reach us. And that food is going to be fresher, it's gonna be more nutritious, it's something that you can share with your neighbors and make your dining table feel really full and wonderful. And so yeah, we obviously have a lot of really amazing homesteaders that shop with us, but tons of people are just growing on a really small scale. And if you want that to be a substantial part of your food, there are ways to do succession planting. There are ways to make it a pretty nice closed system and to make sure that you feel like you have what you need. And I would say that there's a lot you can do in a really small space. And even if you don't want to do a lot, even if your life doesn't allow for that, all of it has value and can feel really nourishing and bountiful.
Yes, it can. I love that. That's so true. Another thing that you mentioned was that, and I actually had never given this thought before until you said it. So, you said that you're using the scraps. So, like, for instance, when you take the seeds out of a tomato, obviously for my home, when I do that, obviously I'm using the tomato too, because that's what I'm doing. But I had never thought about a seed company potentially not using the scraps. But so you're saying that, like, when you take the seeds out of your, bell peppers or your tomatoes or whatever it is that you are saving the seeds for, then you will take what we would not call scrap. We would actually call that the part that we use. And you're making that into, stuff for your family, correct?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, a lot of seed crops, it ends up being an edible product afterwards, right? So if you're growing zucchini for seed, that's not edible zucchini anymore. But I would say tomatoes and peppers are the best example because they're so hard for us to grow, and them at peak maturity, a perfect pepper, a perfect tomato, that's really we let it go past that so the seeds can fully mature, but that more or less is perfect seed. And so then you take it out and you can use that for cooking as well. And so I love encouraging people to do peppers and tomatoes as beginning seed crops, especially in the north, because if you grow it, especially a tomato, there's a lot of genetic diversity in each tomato plant. And so you don't need to save a lot of tomatoes in order to have really strong, viable seed. And you do get to still eat it. And that seed that you save and plant out is already getting passively bred for your microclimate. And so it's going to have these attributes, I love the story of Blacktail Mountain watermelon. It's a watermelon that was grown, I'm going to mess this up, probably in the Dakotas, I believe. And I remember the story was just that it grew. it grew, and so they saved the seeds, and then it became a watermelon that was grown for that short season, cooler temperature climate. And now that watermelon has been around for quite a long time, helping gardeners in those peripheral areas grow watermelon. And so you grow a tomato and you grow it in Nome, then you're breeding a tomato for Nome, and you can still eat it.
That's so cool. That just right there is exciting. Because I love the fact that I don't know the verbiage, so tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but it hardens itself, or it adapts itself to your climate the longer you grow it. Now you've got me curious. We grow cantaloupe commercially. And I think we're the only ones in the state so far that grow them commercially and sell them. And but our cantaloupe that we grow is a hybrid. And now you have me, and it's kind of always, it grows really well. It just we found what works in our exact spot. And we've told people before what we grow, and it doesn't work for everyone, but it works for us in our exact spot. But I've always wondered, is there a seed? Because what if we can't get them? What if we're at the mercy of whoever it is that's hybridizing this specific cantaloupe? So I hadn't thought about, we did grow Blacktail Mountain watermelon and they didn't do great, but I wonder if we had kept the seed and kept going. It's a open pollinated seed then, Blacktail? Okay, well, interesting. Well, now I'm going to try it. Now you convinced me.
Yeah, we sell one. We don't sell Blacktail Mountain because we have also had limited success with it. It has not been successful enough for us to really claim it for northern gardens, at least this far north. And so we sell one cantaloupe that we've had consistent success with. It's called Minnesota Midget, and they're small. They're like softball size, and they're really tasty and sweet. And yeah, they are. I think that's oftentimes what you find with those really difficult crops is smaller dwarf varieties, because they can reach full maturity. And so that one we felt confident enough in to keep in our catalog. And it's definitely, I would say that might be the most difficult variety that we sell. It's a really tough one. But yeah, with hybrids, you can definitely dehybridize them if you have a ton of space, but the best bet is to start with open pollinated seeds, because when you save seeds from hybrids, they won't necessarily grow true to type. And so with those open pollinated seeds, with some basic understanding of cross pollination, you can save seeds from them and make sure that those seeds exist in perpetuity for you, your family, your community. I just wanted to touch on the idea of seeds adapting themselves to your climate. I'd like to think about that like a little bit opposite. So we're actively breeding. So it's not like the seed changes, right? It's just that you have selected this fruit from this seed and it matured early enough, to be fully ripe within our summer. So that strain of that seed is a little bit faster than the rest. And that one is maybe it's a little bit more cold tolerant. There's something about the attributes of that fruit and that strain that really liked it. And so yes, like you were saying with the blacktail watermelon, you if you had saved those seeds, you're like, okay, it's not the tastiest, they didn't quite get as far as, but those ones grew. And so you could try again the next year. And then maybe over time, you could do your own breeding project where you add in some genetics of a tastier watermelon and you're able to create that. And so the more advanced and deeper we get into all this, the more opportunity we have to have a more diverse food system within Alaska and other northern places.
Yeah, which is super important. And although part of our message is embracing what we can grow, because we're originally from Oregon, and I will tell you that I miss picking blackberries. I miss the smell of walking out and smelling blackberries. And Jean was the manager of a really big farm in Oregon before we came up here, and one of their major crops was peaches. And boy, do I miss a peach off a tree. And people grow them up here, but they're not the same peach. It's not the same. And so I think, I think there's a time and a place for, like you said before, like pushing the boundaries. Like cantaloupe, it really isn't. I don't know, because we get pretty decent size, like we get 4 and 5 pound cantaloupe. So so I don't, there's a time and a place, I think, for pushing that, like to see the look on someone's face when they've never eaten it, they've only ever had cantaloupe from the store. And then they try one of ours and they're like, what is this?
Mhm.
This is not cantaloupe that I know. So seeing that is super cool, but also kind of embracing maybe new things too, like honeyberries and Saskatoons. We'd never heard of those things before, and we planted them, and we kind of have this friendly competition going on the farm now. Jean loves honeyberries. I don't really like them. Saskatoons are my favorite berry in the whole wide world. They pushed themselves past blackberries, which was a big deal for me. So I think it's that kind of finding that balance of embracing, maybe we won't be able to do quite what we've been used to doing before, but some things we can, like with cantaloupe, but then also finding these new and amazing varieties, or completely different plants that we've never had before, these foods that we've never had before. And just kind of leaning into that, I think too, is important.
Yeah, I mean, it all has value. And I think that's part of thriving in Alaska is recognizing what we can grow and what we can do. And I also think it's a really important point that sometimes there's a time and place for open pollinated seeds. And if you're not doing seed saving, a lot of times they are more challenging. And there are certain varieties that people really rely on hybrids for. And a lot of fruit, especially cucurbits, when you're growing them under hoop houses, you have to hand pollinate open pollinated seeds. And so if you're trying to do this for your income, for your living on a commercial scale, that's just not reasonable or possible. And so I always encourage people not to get dogmatic about it. And so although we have made this choice, kind of ethically and politically to do open pollinated, there's nothing wrong with hybrid seeds. It's just that they might not exist in the future and you can't save the seeds from them. And so just recognizing, yeah, there's a time and place for them and that they do have value, and getting some spinach that's less likely to bolt, or broccoli heads that are going to get extra large, or these, really staple crops that people rely on. There is a reason that hybrids exist. And just understanding that that is distinctly and very extremely different from GMO seeds, is not of relation. And so, yeah, not shunning these other seeds that really people have worked really hard on, that do have a lot of value in a challenging food system.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and like you said, it's that balance of understanding. We definitely have some hybrid seeds that we use, but I also know that if for some reason they're not available in the future, like that's just that I have no control of that. That's not something that I can control. I have a quick question, and this, I'm only admitting this because I want to be very human. So I had never thought through the difference between open pollinated and heirloom seeds. I always kind of lumped them together, open pollinated, heirloom, because you can just save the seeds. But something on your website that I read, or on your Facebook, I'm not sure where I read it. But it was talking about how, yes, you have heirloom seeds, and some seeds are open pollinated, and they're constantly breeding new open pollinated seeds. And that just never even occurred to me. So can you just expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so heirlooms are open pollinated seeds, but not all open pollinated seeds are heirlooms. Those are going to be our
Bam.
seeds.
That was good right there.
Those are going to be our seeds with a story. I think there's some, like, I don't know, kind of arbitrary rules on what is considered an heirloom. We'll decide in 20 years if we have some new ones. Um, but yeah, so it's those older seeds. They've been around for a long time. They're kind of tried and true, especially in a home garden environment. And so there is major work being done right now to expand open pollinated varieties and encourage open pollinated seed breeding, which oftentimes is very intertwined with organic seed breeding. And there's a really amazing organization called the Open Source Seed Initiative. And the idea is that those seeds will be available in the public commons in perpetuity. And these are new breeds. And so these ones, a lot of what you find even in open pollinated is patented varieties. And so it's not legal to save those seeds. And that is the thing about hybrid seeds too, is that a lot of them have utility patents on them, and you can't legally save those seeds and definitely not sell them, but there's different rules depending on what the seed is and what the patent is. And so that's a lot about what we talk about, kind of understanding the ownership of seeds and why open pollinated and local seed banking is so critical, in terms of long-term food security and also in terms of food sovereignty. But yeah, so when you find a company, there's a lot like ours. A lot of times they are farmer co-ops that are only open pollinated seeds, and that's a choice. That's a political and ethical choice that that company's making. And again, no shade, there's a lot of usefulness in hybrids, but there is, when you create those limits for yourself, especially as a grower, you are forced to really push that envelope, and that creation and that kind of ingenuity is really critical. And I think that those breeders are doing some of the most important work in terms of food justice that we're seeing in our lifetime.
I agree. I think that's pretty I think that that's a pretty good way to kind of sum that up for sure. Yeah. Um so getting back to Foundroot a little bit, I really rabbit trailed and I'm sorry for that. But I want to get back to Foundroot for just a second because I want to know stuff like I'm curious where you source your seeds. You talked about that just a little bit, but also like what is your vision for the future? So right now you said you're sourcing your seeds. Some of them, you try to be as direct from the farmer as you can, and some are from the lower 48, but I'm assuming they're varieties that are going to do well. But the other thing is you carry more than just seeds in your store. So, so I kind of want to catch your vision for the future, where you're getting not just your seeds, but your products from, and what else do you carry and why do you carry those things as well?
Sure. Yeah, so all our seeds are grown in the US. And almost all of them are grown in the lower 48 because we don't have a farm right now. And so part of the value of the seeds that we're selling is that we guarantee incredibly high quality seeds. So we are aggressively testing our seeds. We guarantee above federal standard for our germination rates. If you have any issues with germination within the year of purchase, we absolutely replace those seeds. It's really important to us that the seeds we send out in the world actually grow food for the people that rely on us and that have trusted us with their family's food. So yeah, when you shop with a larger company, there's a really good chance that those seeds aren't grown in the US, and that is a whole different slew of ethics and quality that is probably a different conversation for a different day. And yeah, I just think when you know the people that you're shopping with and there's accountability on both ends, and we feel really we take that responsibility really seriously. So yeah, so most of our seeds are sourced. They always have been. Most companies, even small scale seed companies, are outsourcing that, and it's this amazing network of growers that are kind of working together. And unfortunately, even in the open pollinated world, like one person growing one variety, and you kind of realize that that person stopped or they had a bad year and no one has it in their catalog. And so it is this kind of interesting tight knit group when you actually dig into it and find out who's growing what for whom. Yeah, so the other things that we sell, when we first started 10 years ago, we sold other stuff too, and it was kind of just fun makeshift. And then I would say for a solid 8 years, we only sold seeds. And when we lost our farm, we decided to expand our catalog again, partially to make ends meet and partially because we had the space and mental energy to put towards that. Obviously, farming is a lot. And so we were really focused on that. We're kind of going through an identity transition because we want to support more than just gardening. And so we have a lot of books on baking bread. We have incredibly high-end tools, most of which are for gardening, but they also are just kind of good homestead tools and things that you can repair and things that you can sharpen and that you could pass down to your grandkids if you take really good care of. Kind of investment pieces that will help support a subsistence lifestyle. And then we also have things like mushroom knives for doing wild mushroom hunting, and cloth bags for shopping to have more zero waste products in our catalog. And we have probably an excessive amount of linens. We really love Baltic linen. There's a huge part of our ethics in sourcing these products that is about supporting other farmers. And so supporting the flax industry in Europe is it's just the coolest thing to me. And I love having really high quality linens that are durable, that are environmentally sound, that are beautiful, and that make your kitchen and your dinner table feel beautiful.
I agree. And how cool to have a story behind it's just like seeds. So um I have a seed I'm trying this year that my mom had told me about. It's called, I don't remember what it's called. It'll come back to me. Anyway, it's a shell bean. And people don't usually grow shell beans up here. But when I went to Seed Savers Exchange, it's the only people who have them. And I bought some, and it was super cool reading the story behind this bean. Like, I had no idea anything about, like, I didn't know about it. She just said, this is what my granny grew, and duplicating my granny's garden has been something I've always tried. I've always striven for. And every year I try to get just a little bit closer. I want to duplicate her garden and her pantry. Not exactly the same, but my granny's the only person, she's my example that I have that fed her family from her property. So, or from what she sourced locally. She'd go to Dietering's and get peaches, and she'd go, she didn't have a peach tree, and she had limitations, but everything was local, and she just stocked up. And then all winter long, they were just happy as cats, just eating what my granny had put together. So anyway, so the reading the story behind those beans was really cool. So I ordered some. I'm going to see if I can grow them. We'll see. But how fun to think that not just your seeds can have a story, which you can share with your kids and pass down, which I think stories are a backbone to homesteading, but also your linens. Who would have ever thought that your linens would have any story besides I drove to Walmart in a snowstorm, and while I was there, I bought some kitchen towels. So how fun to think that even the linens can have a story behind them. I just think that just makes the world seem just a little richer, and it makes it feel just a little bit smaller, and rather than dividing us, which we're so good at doing, it brings us together. I just think that's just such a great great thing to stand on, and that's just really neat. So kudos to you. I had no idea about supporting flax
Thank you.
farmers with linens, but that's just a really neat thing. So yeah.
Mhm.
So okay, so you carry quite a few things for the homesteader in your store, so definitely we want to be checking that out. Do you have, I want to kind of switch gears just a little bit, although we did kind of get ahead of ourselves. I got us ahead of ourselves. That's my my doing. But do you have any other thoughts about seed saving? So if someone is considering seed saving, because it is something that you have to, that you have to think of ahead of time. If someone just were to call you up on the phone and say, I want to save these seeds, what are the most basic things I need to know? What would your advice be?
Um, so there's a few main things that you think about when you want to save seeds. And the biggest one is pollination. So how is that plant pollinated? Because just because it's open pollinated doesn't mean that insects and wind aren't going to get in there and cross it with something else. And so if you're going to put the effort towards saving seeds, you want to make sure that those seeds are going to be viable. And so we always recommend starting with plants that are perfect flowers. That means that all the elements of pollination are happening within one flower, and therefore you don't need any outside force to bring that fruit into maturity. So you can, even if insects could get in there, you could like cage them off and they would still produce. The easiest ones in our mind are going to be lettuce, legumes, peas, tomatoes, and peppers. And so with something like a tomato, a lot of times those flowers are sealed up, and you can have several different types in one space and it wouldn't be a problem. But if you have a really vibrant organic garden, it's best to just pick one type. So if you're like, okay, I'd really like to save pea seed this year, I'm going to grow peas, and half of them are going to be for eating, and then half of them are going to be for seed. And we really, I know I talked about how we use the scraps from our tomatoes, which is just kind of like a homesteader method. We actually don't really recommend that. It's really good to just like separate it out, because otherwise you're kind of always fighting that desire for food. And so it's good to just be like, these are for seeds. I'm not going to touch them. And with something like a pea, you just let them dry in the vine. And so, kind of like you were talking about the shelling bean, those are seeds. And so dry beans are seeds. And that's a pretty intuitive, easy way of starting your seed saving. So yeah, pick something with a perfect flower. Make sure that it's not going to cross pollinate. So, maybe just grow one of that type. And then you just want to make sure you have a minimum population size. And that's something that you can look up online or in a seed saving book and see how many plants you would need to create enough genetic diversity to make sure that seed is viable. It's usually not that many. It's not that big of a deal. It's really pretty functional if you have a small to medium sized home garden. There are certain plants where it's no problem. I think peas are a really great example. I think tomatoes are a really great example because they are difficult to grow in Alaska. And so if you grow one, you've got some seed, save your first 5 tomatoes for seed, and then you can eat off the plant for the rest.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that. And I love the idea. I love how you simplified it, especially if you're just getting started in seed saving. Just pick one. Just pick one. And I think we tend to, when we start, especially in homesteading, because it feels like everything's kind of packed in and you got to get all this stuff done. And we have these grand visions of, like I have with replacing, with mimicking my granny's pantry. But I've been at this for like 8 years, and every year I get closer. But I did actually, the first year I did kind of go overboard, and it was exhausting and it wasn't beneficial and it was terrible and I wasted a lot of food. So I like the idea of starting, just pick one, kind of learn your way and get into it just a little bit deeper. I did the same thing with fermenting. I just did, the one kind of general lacto ferment, and then it got kind of fun. Then you add kombucha and you add gin and you add, your different things. But maybe just starting with one is such a better and more manageable, and you learn so much with just like that education in that first year is, the learning curve is huge, but it's invaluable, and you're going to retain a lot more and have a lot less frustration. So I like that. Okay. All right. So now I just want to ask one more question, because I feel like you're a wealth of knowledge, and like I want I want our listeners both to get as much from this as they can. So you also, I think it's really fun that you have lived in Palmer and you've lived in Haines. So you've lived in the valley and you've lived in the southern area down there. So can you tell, like do you have any kind of across the board universal gardening tips, or maybe, or the opposite, like this worked in Palmer, this did not work in Haines, vice versa? Because gardening information is a little harder to come by here, like zone 2, zone 3 especially, is a little harder to come by than it is, say, for zone 6 and zone 7. I feel like there's just so much more education out there for those zones. So I know even with our homesteading classes that we offer, sometimes people will say, well, we did a beekeeping class and people asked, is this gonna, there were people in Homer watching, and there were people in Juneau watching. And so their question was, how much of this actually pertains to us? And so he tried really hard to, it was based in South Central, but these are practices that will work in Alaska. So that was a really long way to ask the question of, considering living in Palmer and in the southern part of the state, like what are some just gardening tips that you have?
Sure. Well, let me talk a little bit about the microclimate in Haines and why we left Palmer. So Palmer, I think it's changed honestly in that we've been gone for 8, 9 years now. And so the climate actually has changed substantially. From my understanding, we would get these freak frosts in August. And so a huge part of seed saving is just season extension, right? You're not just growing the fruit, you got to get that all the way past to seed, especially for something like a zucchini. Like it's just that much longer. Dry beans. And and so that was the difference. So we're talking about, you know, really small shifts that we felt like would just allow us to get there a little bit easier. Haynes is pretty variable, but I would say that in general, we could run anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks longer in our season. And so that makes a huge difference. That being said, one thing we didn't take into consideration was the moisture. So we get these horrible wet falls and then our seeds just mold. And so it really depends on the crop and what we're trying to do, and if it's a dry crop, or, you know, and so there's still a lot of pivots and kind of infrastructure that you need to get those seeds to full maturity, even in a place like Haynes. Part of why Haynes was kind of special and interesting is it actually has a ton of microclimates here as well. And so you go 25 miles out the road and it really is exactly like Palmer. It's a little bit drier and a little bit warmer in the summer. It's not coastal, and it definitely runs a shorter season. So they lose that time. And that's also part of why our search for land has been challenging here, is that we really specifically want to be in town in Haynes because that's where you get the longer season. And you get really deep snowpack to insulate the ground for perennials. And so it's really interesting here because there's kind of a lot of different little nooks and crannies. You go to another area, they have no topsoil. It's super coastal, it's super wet. And so within a 40-mile stretch of road, we have a lot of examples of all of Alaska right here in Haynes. You go up near the border, you really are pushing an interior climate. Not quite, but it allows us to test those things and talk with gardeners and understand it. And then, you know, we do a trial here in Haynes with locals, and then we can send it to farmers in the interior and ask them what they think. And so that was part of why Haynes was special and different, and why we have been trying so hard to keep our farm here. That being said, yeah, we have the same challenges. Just because it's not frost doesn't mean it's not like heavy rain. And so we're just trying to get there. And so best practices for northern gardening is definitely about creating your infrastructure before you start. And yes, I'm going to encourage you to do makeshift things every which way. You know, throw some greenhouse plastic around your potted tomatoes, create a little mini greenhouse, you know, do all these things. But ultimately, if you want to do serious food production long term, I'm always telling people to scale it back, kind of what you were talking about, like bring it in, hone it in. Let's start with one bed this year. Let's make sure the soil is really good. Let's not just like grab dirt from anywhere and a ton of noxious weeds. Let's set ourselves up for success. And so let's create the hoops. Let's not use visqueen. Let's get greenhouse plastic. Let's get proper row cover. Let's do things that are going to serve us long term. Let's create our irrigation system. We definitely started our farm by dry farming because we didn't have water on the land. It was completely fine for 2 years, and then it was 90 degrees here for like a 6-week stretch, and our crops were dying, and we emergency style had to get a tank, and we got a well pump, and we created this whole like very elaborate system because we're in a rainforest. We thought it'd be fine. It wasn't fine. So I think that's probably true anywhere you grow, but I think when you're dealing with so many different factors, so many variables in a northern climate, you really need to set yourself up for long-term success. And just, yeah, it's okay if you just grow carrots and kale in your first year. Like, that's great food. Let's do a really good job with just some carrots and kale, and then let's add a couple more things. Like, I think it's so exciting to start a home garden and to come into Alaska and want to live that homesteader lifestyle to whatever degree you're doing it. People just go all in and they burn themselves out and they're super exhausted and they don't want to do it anymore. So my goal is always to encourage you to grow food in a way that's going to make you want to keep growing food.
Yes. And another thing to that is I want to add to that. So if you, and I don't say just as though it's minimal, but let's say that you're only growing carrots and kale this year. Now you have an abundance of carrots and kale, and you have the opportunity to learn how to use all those carrots and all that kale. Because the other part that you have to think of, yeah, it's really fun to plant these little seedlings, and it's a lot of work in the spring, but that's okay because the sun is shining. But those little seedlings grow up into plants, and those plants make food, and that food has to be put up. And a lot of times the majority of that food has to be put up at exactly the same time, and it isn't very patient, and the rains come in and you have to worry about, things rotting before you can get to them. And it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but there is that piece of that element of this preservation time that is it's a little much actually. And you can't have, for me, with the amount of preservation that I do, I can't really have an outside life for just a little while. It's all about, and you have to think of the cost of, so if you're going to start canning, holy moly, jars are expensive. And, there's just things to consider. So, and what are you going to do with it? And what if, and this, I've done this more than once, what if you preserve this stuff and your people don't like it? I did one year, I went on the soup kick and it was great, but I canned, I don't know, like 50 jars of a lot of split pea soup. And I like split pea soup, but I do not like 50 jars in a year worth of split pea soup. And nobody else in my family liked it. They were like, and it wasn't like, because my family's not picky. Like when I was raising my kids, if they had like one food that they like, my son has never liked fish. That's okay. You can have, a thing or two that just aren't to your taste. We all do. But the split pea soup they were like, no, Mom, this is bad. This is so bad. And even my sweet husband, who eats pretty much everything I stick in front of him, was like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. So back to just saying, so now you have carrots and kale. Learn what to do with the kale. Kale is awesome frozen and thrown in soups. And it adds this amazing element to any soup. It can be a chicken soup. It can be, a Mexican soup. It can be any soup. But you have to know what to do with it. And it's the same with carrots, or whatever it is that you're growing. So there's nothing wrong with starting small. And in the end, you may find yourself being more successful because you're going to get creative with what to do with the carrots. The other cool thing is if you grow excess carrots, then maybe someone down the road has extra tomatoes. And so you can trade carrots for tomatoes. And now you have kale, carrots, and tomatoes. Now you have soup. So
yeah, I think the fact that it's currency is really important that people don't consider. And so it's about being part of a broader network and a broader community of people who want to live this way and want to do these types of things. And so I would say that my pickled beets are definitely currency. I don't know if I can eat them anymore because I've had so many over the course of a decade, but other people love them and say that they're the best pickled beets they've ever had. And so if I have too many beets, I can pickle them, I can trade them. Especially when we're farming, it's really hard for us to go fishing and hunting, and we eat both. And so using those things as currency with friends and neighbors, commercial fishermen are bountiful in our town and they don't have time to have gardens. And so yeah, things like that. Also, I did a little video on Instagram on how I freeze my kale, and I didn't think it was very I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't think it was very important or interesting, and people loved it because we have so much of it. It is something that grows so well. And so I've been trying to show ways that you can use that kale this winter. And so even if you're not going to trade frozen kale, because that's kind of a tough sell, you could trade palak paneer or spanakopita, or, that's the food that you drop off when someone has a baby, or if, there's like a, change in life event, something like that. And those things have a lot of value, even if you don't realize it initially.
They absolutely do. And there's something about both giving and receiving a gift that has something fresh from your garden in it, or it just adds a depth to the gift. That's just a really neat. So I love that you said that. So Leah, is there anything that you'd like to add? Actually, let me back up because I want to know, where can people find you? So you mentioned that you're on Instagram, and I'm sure there are people that are going to look up this kale thing, and they're probably Googling your pickled beet recipe too. They're like, did she post her pickled beet recipe somewhere?
I need to post that one. Yeah, I haven't posted that one. I will though. I will.
All right.
Yeah, so we're on Instagram and Facebook. A lot of the stuff I talked about is more video based, and so that's going to be in the highlights of Instagram and in our reels. And we're at www.foundroot.com. And yeah, we love chatting with customers and hearing about their needs and trying to help them get their garden full of great food. So definitely get in touch.
All right. I love that. Leah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. And I just would encourage everyone, if you've not checked out their website and their socials, check it out because it's just inspiring. Especially this time of year when winter feels like maybe it's not ever going to stop. And then it's really fun and inspiring to think, it's fun to buy seeds. I think most of us probably all buy way too many seeds because we're just so excited, but also just learning what we can do up here, and instead of focusing on what we can do, and some of the things that we can do are pretty incredible. So thank you also for the work that you put into this, and for your vision and for your passion. And yeah, we're excited that you're here. So
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely.